so let's talk about the pre-trip. You should have all had the paper handed out to you. That'll be what you use as a study guide. Well, we're going to want to get rid of that as quickly as possible and start doing this from memory. But you'll see the process we have in place. So why do we do a pre-trip? Well, our textbook, one of the things it covers, one of the first things it says when we talk about the pre-trip chapter, it says, as well as being a regulatory requirement, proper vehicle inspection can go a long way in ensuring your vehicle's safe and efficient operation. Vehicle inspections can help in finding mechanical problems before they cause a breakdown or accident. Okay, so really that's what it's all about. It's about finding problems before they cause issues out on the road. As best and as much as possible, let's get these taken care of when the vehicle is in a non-moving situation. Okay, by avoiding a good pre-trip, you could be costing yourself time as well as possibly money in the form of fines. Okay. Now, the pre-trip test itself is the first of 3 tests that have to occur in order for you to get your CDL. Obviously, the pre-trip is all about safety. Okay, so we don't want to be caught in a situation where we're not doing a pre-trip, and because of that, our vehicle gets involved in an accident and we're found negligent. Okay, we just don't even want to go down that road. It's designed to catch any kind of safety items before we get this vehicle out on the road. Now, we always hear the term pre-trip, but in truth, there is also an en-route inspection and a post-trip. In truth, this inspection is an ever-going, never-ending process. Every time you are coming up to the vehicle, every time you're approaching the vehicle, while you're operating the vehicle nonstop, you're listening, looking, hearing, smelling, trying to catch that one moment when something is going wrong with that vehicle. Okay? If you're not doing a good pre-trip, you could be getting, like I said, fines. You could also be getting CSA points. That's compliance, safety, and accountability. And we'll go over what that means. But too high a CSA points, to sum it up, we'll make it simple. If you get too many CSA points, you could become unhireable by a company. They might not want to touch you. And it works basically like your MVR. Those points fall off after so long. But we don't want to get in a situation where we can't get hired. Now let's talk about one thing, the difference here. We're talking about the pre-trip that you have to do to pass your CDL test. Okay, so this is done in a specific way. And although it covers the things we should be looking at, it's not really designed around a real-world pre-trip. One of the differences here is they're not testing the truck. They're testing your knowledge of how to perform a pre-trip on the truck. So obviously for the test, they're looking at you, whereas in the real world, we're looking for items on the truck. Unlike the other test on the CDL test, your goal here is to get as many points as possible, whereas the other test you want as few points as possible. You get a point for every item you say on this. So we want to make sure that we're speaking up, we're speaking loudly and clearly. If you're a whisper talker, okay, you're going to have to speak up. If they don't hear it, you won't get credit for it, and you can't go back and say, oh no, I did say that. If they don't hear it, you don't get credit for it, and they will not necessarily always tell you everything you missed. So make sure you're speaking up, you're speaking clearly, all right, and you're speaking loud enough that they can hear you. On the CDL pre-trip test, you're only going to be testing the driver's side, whereas in the real world, we check the whole truck. Now, the only thing you test on the passenger side would be the passenger side of the engine compartment. Everything else on the passenger side of the truck would basically be the same as what you're going to find on the driver's side of the truck. So for the test, you're only going to be looking at the driver's side of the truck. Now, it is very repetitive. You're going to hear terminology. It's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken. There's no abrasions, bumps, or cuts. It's not cut or frayed. You're going to hear these, it's not leaking. You're just going to hear these terminology over and over, and you're going to be saying them over and over again on the test. It's just what it is, okay? Don't take it for granted. So many people have failed. They used to do the outside of the truck and then do the in-cab and the 7-step brake test last. So many people failed in that section that they decided to move it first so they wouldn't waste all their time. Now, in addition, we're going to discuss how this test is set up, but you could get the entire truck. At random, a certain percentage of individuals in the state of Illinois are selected to test on the entire truck. Otherwise, you're only going to get sections. So let's talk about that. All right. Everyone is going to do the in-cab inspection and the 7-step brake test, and this will be done first. This is where people normally mess up. So once again, do not take that for granted. Next, you'll be given the coupling system. Okay. Everybody does that. Once you're done with the coupling system, they're going to tell you what comes next. You will either get Form A, Form B, or Form C, or if you get the whole truck, you get a combination of all three of those. Form A is the front overview of the truck, everything from the top to the bottom on the front of the truck. Pop the hood, passenger side engine compartment, driver side engine compartment, steering, brake, suspension, tires, rims, axle. Okay? That's Form A. Form B would be when you close the hood, everything right behind the hood. So it's basically going to be from your mirror on the driver's side, okay, all the way back to the back of the tractor, which is going to include the side of the truck, side of the sleeper area, back of the sleeper area, and then everything to the back of the truck. You won't have to redo the coupling system because you've already done that. That would be Form B. Then if you get Form C, you're going to get the entire trailer. Okay. Form B would include one drive axle as well. Everything includes an axle. So Form B, you got your drive axle. It's going to be the rearmost drive axle. If you did the front drive axle and then you tell them, oh, I just realized you told me to do the rear one, they're still going to give you credit for everything. Okay. So Form C is going to be the entire trailer, front to the back, top to the bottom, underneath, including a tandem axle, all right, one of the trailer axles. So everybody gets an axle. What you're going to get, we don't know, they don't know until they pull the test, all right? So we have to practice on everything. But basically, as you can see, since everybody gets an axle, we really want to hone in on our in-cab 7-step and coupling. We all know we're going to do that. And then be able to do an axle from memory, and that's from the axle out, suspension, brakes, tires, rim. All right? So that's the basic of it. We're going to set up outside and show you how to get set up, do your in-cab and 7-step. We're going to flow through this without much interruption. The only thing I will say here, so that you understand how it works, when you get done with the in-cab and 7-step inspection, you're going to say that completes my in-cab and 7-step inspection. You don't say that until you're done with both, okay? When you get done with, say you get Form A, when you get done with Form A, you're going to say, and that completes my Form A, or that's everything I have to say about Form A. However, I do need to do a light check, and if you would be so kind as to assist me with that, and then they'll assist you in doing a light check on whatever section you got. So when you end the form or when you end a section, you need to tell them that's everything you have to say about that section, because they won't. They're just going to stand there and wait for you to be done. And they're going to make you think you've missed stuff. That's what they're supposed to do. They're just like, are you done? Is there anything else? Do you want to add anything else? And if you don't have anything else to add, then we're done. Okay? So that's the basic of it. Let's look at it. We're going to let it flow from start to finish. And I'll get set up out in the truck and we'll get a pre-trip done. Okay, so now we are going to do our in-cab inspection and our 7-step brake test. The first thing I'm going to do when I do that is put on my seatbelt. So I want to look at that, make sure that it is not cut or frayed, and that it latches properly. And then for safety, I'm going to ask that the examiner put on their safety belt as well. Then I'm going to perform a safe start so that I can build up air pressure. To do that, I want to make sure that the gear shift is in neutral. To press the clutch, I'm going to let the gauges sweep. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and start the vehicle. Now, anytime I start the vehicle, I want to make sure that my oil pressure comes up within 3 to 5 seconds. If not, I'm going to shut the truck off to avoid damage to the motor. I also want to watch on my tachometer here for my ABS light indicator. It comes on when I first start the vehicle. I want to make sure that that goes off. If it does not go off, it would indicate that there is a problem. Now I want to check for my 3 safety items. Next to my seat here is my fire extinguisher. I want to make sure that that is properly mounted and secured. It's fully charged. It has a pin in it. It's of the proper rating of 10 BC or higher, and it is not leaking. I also want to check for my 3 safety reflective triangles. Those will be located in my side box. Then I want to look at my glove compartment. I should have spare fuses or circuit breakers for every electrical component on the truck. Now I want to look around and check my floor. I just want to make sure that that is clean, clear, free of any debris, any items that could slide or roll forward underneath my pedals and hinder their movement. Then I want to check my pedals. I want to make sure that they have a rubber and or groove surface on them. They are clean of any kind of debris, anything that could cause my feet to slip off, and they do function properly. I want to look at my gear shift. I want to make sure that that is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken. I want to make sure that my range selector is functioning properly. Then I also want to look at my shifter boot. I want to make sure that that is not dry rotted and that it has a good seal on it. I want to check my brake release valves. I want to make sure that they are properly mounted and secured. They are the proper shape and or label, and they're not broken and not leaking. I want to check my steering wheel. I want to make sure that that is properly mounted and secured. It is not cracked or broken. It has no more than 10 degrees of free play in it, which is 2 inches in a 20-inch wheel. I want to check my city horn and my air horn. Then I want to look at my overhead storage bins up here, and I want to make sure that they're clean of any kind of debris, loose items that could fall out on me while I'm driving. I want to check my visor. I want to make sure that that's properly mounted and secured. It is not cracked or broken. Then I want to check my front windshield. I want to make sure that that's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken. It's clean, clear, free of any debris. There are no illegal stickers on it. I have an inspection sticker that is current and up to date. I want to check the seal around it. I want to make sure that that is not dry rotted, it's in good condition and not leaking. I want to check my side windows. I want to make sure that they are properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked or broken. They're clean, clear, free of any debris. There's no illegal stickers, and they do roll up and down. My mirrors, I want to make sure are properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked or broken. They're clean, clear, free of any debris, and they are adjusted properly for me. I also want to look at my dash. I just want to make sure that's clear of any items, loose items that could roll around, slide off, or fall on me while I'm driving. Then I want to check my gauges. I'm going to start with my voltmeter gauge. I want to make sure that that is functioning properly and showing the proper level of about 14 volts. I want to check my oil pressure gauge, make sure that that is functioning properly, and that is showing the proper level of about 30 to 60 psi depending on the manufacturer of the engine. I want to check my water temperature gauge. I want to make sure that that is functioning properly. I will continue to monitor that as I drive to watch to see that it rises within operating level and does not exceed it. That normally would run at about 180 degrees. It could go up to 210 to 220 if pulling a hill or under a load. That would be normal. I want to check my tachometer. I can step on the accelerator pedal to check that. I want to check my fuel and DEF gauge, make sure that those are functioning properly and showing that I do have fuel. My speedometer I can check when I do my service brake test. I have a brake application gauge. I want to check and make sure that that's functioning properly. I can step on the brake to check that. Then I want to check my primary and my secondary air pressure gauges to make sure that those are functioning properly and showing the proper level of about 120 to 125 psi. The maximum on that is 150 psi, and if I ever got close to that, I would shut the truck off and release air by either fanning the brakes down or stepping out and opening up the petcock valve. I also want to monitor these secondary gauges as I drive to make sure that they are functioning properly and are within the proper range. Then I want to check my headlights. I'm going to turn my headlights on and check my indicator is working. The light here comes on and my dash dims, so I know that my indicator is working. I want to check my high beam indicator, that is functioning correctly. Then I want to check my left turn signal indicator and my right turn signal indicator to make sure that that is functioning correctly, and my hazard indicators to make sure that that is functioning correctly. Then I want to turn on my windshield wipers. I want to make sure that they are properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked or broken. They have the proper tension to the window. The windshield wiper rubber is in good condition, not dry rotted. The windshield wipers function, and I do have washer fluid. Then I want to check my heater and my defroster controls. I want to turn that on blend for defroster and heater. Turn the fan on. Check up here on my dash to make sure I feel air, and also below to make sure I have air coming out down below. I do. Now I can begin my 7-step brake test. In order to do that, I need to put the truck in low gear and or chalk the tires. I want to turn the truck off, and I want to turn the key back to the on position. I want to push in both my brake valves to release my brakes. And I want to crack my window to listen for any leaks. The first test I'm going to do is my static test. After my initial air loss, I want to make sure that I lose no more than 3 psi of air in a combination vehicle in 60 seconds. 1 1000, 2 1000, 3 1000, 4 1000, 5 1000. And I'm going to move on once the examiner tells me, or I'll continue to count to 60. The next thing I want to do is my applied test. For this, I'll need to put my foot on the brake pedal. I want to apply pressure. After my initial air loss, I should lose no more than 4 psi of air in 60 seconds in a combination vehicle. 1 1000, 2 1000, 3 1000, 4 1000, 5 1000, and I'm told to move on. The next test I'm going to perform is my low pressure warning buzzer and light. I'm going to fan my brakes down, and at or before 60 psi, both my low pressure light and buzzer should come on. They came on. Now I'm going to perform my emergency test. I'm going to continue to fan my brakes down, and between 20 and 45 psi, both of my brake valves should pop out. And they both popped out. Now, I'm going to perform a safe start so that I can build back up air pressure in order to do my tug test. To do that, I want to make sure that the gear shift is in neutral, and then I'll go ahead and start the vehicle. Now, while I'm waiting for air pressure to build back up, I can list my governor cut in and cut out rates. Anytime my air falls below 100 psi, my air compressor will kick in, and I'll begin to make air. When I reach 120 to 125 psi, that air compressor, the governor, will cut off. My air compressor will stop making air, and I'll know I've reached full pressure when I hear what sounds like a little sneeze. I should also build between 85 and 100 psi of air in 45 seconds. And then if it's okay with the examiner, I'll go ahead and rev it up to 1,000 RPMs in order to build up air pressure quicker. They may have you go all the way to 125 psi. They may, once you reach around 100 to 110 psi, they may tell you to continue on from there. Either way is fine if they tell you to move on. If not, just keep it revved at around 1,000 RPMs until you hear the sneeze. And there was the sneeze. Okay, so now I can begin my tug test. To do that, I am going to put the truck in low gear. I'm first going to test my trailer brakes. So to do that, I am going to release my tractor brakes by pushing in the yellow valve with my foot off the brake pedal. I'm going to let out on the clutch until I feel a tug. I should feel resistance. And there is the tug. Okay. Now I'm going to test my tractor brakes. To do that, I'm going to set my tractor brakes, and I'm going to release my trailer brakes with the gear shift still in low, my foot not on the brake pedal. I'm going to let out on the clutch until I feel resistance, until I feel a little tug. Okay, I felt the tug and it held. Next, I'm going to perform my service brake test. To do that, I'm going to release both brakes. I'm going to have the truck in low gear. I'm going to pull forward at about 5 miles an hour while lightly holding on the steering wheel. The truck should stop smoothly without delay, and it should not pull from one side to the other. If it does, it could indicate a brake out of adjustment, a lower flat tire, or a suspension problem. The truck stopped smoothly. It did not pull from the left to the right, which indicates I have no brake out of adjustment, no suspension problems, no lower flat tire, and my speedometer did also work. This would conclude my in-cab inspection and my 7-step brake test. Okay, I'm going to get the truck backed up and we will get set up outside to continue the pre-trip outside the vehicle. Okay, coupling system. First, I want to check my airline connections at both ends. I want to make sure there are no abrasions, bumps, or cuts, and they're not leaking. I want to look at the grommet inside the airlines. I want to make sure that that's not dry rotted and there's no debris that would hinder the airflow. I want to look over my pigtail, check at both ends. I want to make sure that that is not cut or frayed. There are no bent pins on either connection, and there is no debris in either end of the pigtail. I also want to make sure it has a safety latch to hold it in place on each end. I want to make sure that the airlines and the pigtail have proper clearance off of the catwalk. Now I want to look at my trailer apron. I want to make sure that that is not cracked or broken and that there is no visible daylight between the apron and the fifth wheel. I want to look at my fifth wheel platform and I want to make sure that that is properly mounted and secured to the slide rail deck. It's not cracked or broken and there are no loose or missing bolts. I also want to make sure that the fifth wheel platform is properly greased to prevent any steering problems. Now this is a sliding fifth wheel, so I do want to make sure that the pins are out in the lock position. I want to make sure that the slide rail deck is not damaged and it's free of any debris that might hinder its movement. I want to look at the air lines going to my release piston, make sure they're properly mounted and secured. There's no abrasions, bumps, or cuts, and they are not leaking. I want to look at the piston and make sure it's properly mounted and secured, and it's not cracked or broken, and it's not leaking. I want to look at my release arm. I want to make sure it's properly mounted and secured, it's not cracked or broken, and it is engaged in the lock position. Then I want to move around and look inside my fifth wheel, look up in between the V there. I want to make sure the locking jaws are securely locked around the shank of the kingpin. And I want to look at my kingpin and make sure that it is properly mounted and secured to the trailer and it is not cracked or broken. And that would conclude everything I have to say on my coupling system. Okay, I'll be doing Form A, front of the tractor and everything under the hood, including the steer axle. I want to start here on my Form A. I want to start with the front overview. Just want to, as I'm looking at the vehicle, I want to make sure that it's not leaning from one side to the other. If it is, it could mean a lower flat tire, a suspension problem, or a shifted load. I want to look underneath and I want to check for any puddles. If I see any puddles, it could indicate a fluid leak. Starting at the top and working my way down, I want to check my marker lights. I want to make sure they're properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked or broken, and they are free of moisture. They're the proper color of amber and can be seen from 500 feet away at night. I want to look at my windshield, make sure that's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken. I want to make sure it's clean, clear, free of debris, and it is not leaking. And the seal around the window is not dry rotted. I want to look at my windshield wipers. I want to make sure they're properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked or broken, and I do have the proper tension to the window. And then I want to make sure my windshield wiper rubber is not cracked or dry rotted. Now I want to look over the overall condition of my hood and just look for any damage. I do also want to make sure that my hood is latched properly. I want to look at my grill, make sure it is properly mounted and secured, and it is not damaged. I also want to make sure that it's free of any debris that could hinder airflow. Now I want to check my spot mirrors, make sure they're properly mounted and secured. The glass is not cracked or broken, and it's clean, clear, free of debris. I want to look at my headlights and my blinker lights, make sure they're properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked or broken. They're free of moisture and are of the proper color. I want to look at my bumper and make sure that that is properly mounted and secured, not cracked or broken. And then I want to look at my license plate and make sure that that's properly mounted and secured. It is not loose and it is current and up to date. Now I will open up the hood, and we will start on the passenger side of the engine compartment. Okay, on the passenger side of the engine compartment, I want to start off just by doing a general overview. I don't see anything loose or hanging and no visual signs of any damage or leaks. I do want to check all hoses, just make sure they're properly mounted and secured. No abrasions, bumps, or cuts, and they're not leaking. Check any wires, make sure there are none loose, they're not cut or frayed. I'm going to look at my coolant reservoir and make sure that's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken and not leaking. And I also do want to make sure my coolant is at the proper level. It should have a cap on it that is tight and has a good seal and is not leaking. I want to look at my radiator, make sure it's properly mounted and secured, it's not cracked or broken, and it's not leaking. I want to look at my fan blades on this side and make sure that they're not cracked or broken and that there are none missing. I want to check my belt-driven water pump, make sure it's properly mounted and secured, it's not cracked or broken, and it's not leaking. I want to look over my turbo and make sure there are no loose or broken hose clamps. And then I also want to check my frame, make sure that that is not cracked or broken, and there are no illegal welds. And now I will move around to the driver's side. Okay, on the driver's side, I'm going to do a general overview once again. I just want to make sure I don't see anything loose or hanging, and there's no visual signs of any damage or leaks. I want to check all the hoses, make sure they're properly mounted and secured, no abrasions, bumps, or cuts, and they're not leaking. Look over any wires, make sure there's none loose, not cut, or frayed. I will start up here checking with my hydraulic clutch reservoir, making sure it is properly mounted and secured. It is not cracked or broken. It is a cap that is tight and is not leaking. My gear-driven air compressor is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken, and it's not leaking. I want to check the air lines coming from the air compressor, make sure they're tight and they're not leaking. Below that is my gear-driven power steering pump. I want to make sure it's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken, and it's not leaking. Any hoses coming from it are secure and tight, and they are not leaking. Now I want to check my oil fill cap, make sure that it is tight and it is not leaking. Look over my dipstick. It's where I check my oil. I want to make sure that it's tight, it's not leaking. I want to make sure that the oil is of the proper level. If it was at the add mark, I would then add 1 gallon. I want to look at my alternator and make sure it's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken. My alternator is belt driven. I want to check the wires coming from it. They are secure, properly mounted and secured, not cut or frayed. I want to check my air conditioner compressor, my AC compressor, make sure it is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken, and it's not leaking. It is also belt driven. I want to check my serpentine belt, and I want to make sure that it is not cut or frayed and that it has no more than 1/4 inch of free play on it. I want to look at my fan blades on this side, make sure that they're not cracked or broken and there's none missing. Look at my windshield washer reservoir. It's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken. It's not leaking, and it has a cap on it. Check my frame. I want to make sure that that is not cracked or broken, and it has no illegal welds. I'm going to look over my power steering fluid reservoir, make sure it's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken. It's not leaking, and it has a cap that is tight. The hose is secure. There's no abrasions, bumps, or cuts. And it's not leaking, and the reservoir is at the proper fluid level. I want to look at my steering shaft. All right, my steering shaft is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken, and it has no more than 10 degrees of free play in it. My U-joints are properly mounted and secured, not cracked or broken, and properly greased. I want to look at my steering gearbox, make sure it's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken, and it's not leaking. I want to look over my pitman arm, my drag link, and my steering knuckle. Make sure it's properly mounted and secured, and it's not cracked or broken. I also want to make sure there's a castle nut and cotter pin found on the steering knuckle and pitman arm, and it's not loose, cracked, or broken. I want to look over my tie rod, make sure that that's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken. And then look over my axle and make sure that that is not cracked or broken. I'll be doing my suspension. This is a leaf spring suspension on this axle. I want to check the hangers. The front hanger and the back are properly mounted and secured at the top and bottom. They're not cracked or broken. My leaf springs are not cracked, shifted, or broken and can't have 1/4 or more damaged or missing. My U-bolts, properly mounted and secured, they're not cracked or broken, and they're not loose. The shock absorber is properly mounted and secured, top and bottom, and it's not cracked or broken, and it is not leaking. Now onto my brakes. I want to check the air line going to my brake chamber, make sure it's properly mounted and secured. There's no abrasions, bumps, or cuts, and it's not leaking. The ABS line is properly mounted and secured, and it's not cut or frayed. My brake chamber is properly mounted and secured, it's not cracked or broken, and has no holes except for the manufacturer's hole, and it is not leaking. I'm going to look at my push rod and my slack adjuster, make sure they're properly mounted and secured, they're not cracked or broken, and they can have no more than 1 inch of free play with the brakes released. These are drum S-cam brakes, and I can have no less than 1/4 inch friction material on my brake pad or shoes. I also want to make sure there's no oil, grease, or debris which could hinder the brakes from functioning properly. My drum is properly mounted and secured, it's not cracked or broken, and has no holes or illegal welds. There's also no oil, grease, or debris on the drum that could hinder the operation of the brakes, and I can have no cracks greater than half the width of the friction surface. Now I'll be looking at my steer tire. This is my steer tire. I want to check all 3 sides for abrasions, bumps, and cuts. I should have even tread wear across the top, and it should be the same size and type across the axle. I should have a minimum of 4/32 inch tread depth, and since it is a steer tire, it cannot be a recap or retread. I should have 100 to 105 psi of air, and I can check that with the tire pressure gauge at the valve stem or with the tire thumper. I want to check my valve stem. I want to make sure it's properly mounted and secured, it's not cracked or broken, and it is not leaking. It must have a metal cap on the valve stem. And then I also want to look and make sure that both my inner and outer sidewall are properly beaded to the rim. That'll take me into my rim, and I want to check and make sure that that is not cracked or broken and has no illegal welds. I want to look at all my lug nuts. I want to make sure that they are all present and tight. Signs of a loose lug nut are a rust streak, metal shavings, or a white chalky streak on an aluminum rim. And then I want to look at my hub oil seal. I want to make sure that that's properly mounted and secured. It is not cracked or broken, and it is not leaking. I can remove the cap on the hub oil seal to check the oil level. I need to do an external light check, so I'm going to ask the examiner to please assist me with that. And once I've done that, then that will conclude my Form A inspection. Okay, I want to do my Form B inspection. That's everything from the behind the hood on the tractor, including the farthest most drive axle. I'm going to start here on the side of the truck. I want to check that my mirror is properly mounted and secured, the glass is not cracked or broken, and it's clean, clear, and free of debris. I want to look at my window, make sure it's properly mounted and secured, it's not cracked or broken, and it's clean, clear, and free of debris. I want to look at my door handle, make sure that that is properly mounted and secured, it's not cracked or broken, and I want to check that my door will open and close. Now inside my door, I want to check the door seal and make sure it is not damaged or dry rotted. I also want to look at the door hinges, make sure they're not loose, cracked, or broken. I want to look at my steps. I want to make sure they are properly mounted and secured, they're not cracked or broken, and they're free of oil, grease, or any substance that might cause me to slip and fall. Then I want to look at my batteries. I want to make sure they're properly mounted and secured, they have caps on them, they're not leaking, and there is no corrosion, any wires are not cut or frayed. I'm going to look at my DEF cap. I want to make sure that that is tight, it's not broken or leaking. Make sure it has a good seal on it and that it has a chain or strap to hold it in place. I want to look at the overall condition on the side here, the back of my sleeper. Just want to make sure there's no damage, holes, or intrusions. My side box here will open and close and is not damaged. We'll look at my fairing, make sure it's properly mounted and secured, there's no damage, and the rubber on the back of the fairing here is in good condition and not dry rotted. Now I'll move around to the back of the sleeper area. I want to first start off right here with my utility lights, make sure they're properly mounted and secured, they're not cracked or broken, and free of moisture. Look at any hand holds, make sure they're properly mounted and secured, and they're not cracked or broken. I can check the air lines here connected to the truck. They're properly mounted and secured. They're not leaking. There's no abrasions, bumps, or cuts. And they have the proper clearance off the catwalk. My pigtail connection to the truck, that's not cut or frayed. There's no loose pins, no debris in the plug, and it has a latch to hold it in place. I want to look at my dummy coupler. I want to make sure that that is properly mounted and secured. It is not cracked or broken. Now I'm going to check my catwalk and my steps, make sure they're properly mounted and secured, they're not cracked or broken, and they're free of any substance that could cause me to slip and fall. Then I will look over my frame. I want to make sure that that is not cracked or broken, and there are no illegal welds. I want to look at my frame cross members, make sure that they are not cracked or broken. Look over my drive shaft, make sure it's properly mounted and secured, it's not cracked or broken. My U-joints are not cracked or broken, and they are properly greased. My differential is not cracked or broken, and it's not leaking. I want to look at the torque arm, make sure it's properly mounted and secured, and it's not cracked or broken. Now I'm going to look at my fuel tanks here. I want to make sure it's properly mounted and secured, it's not cracked or broken, and obviously it's not leaking. I do want to make sure the cap is tight, it has a good seal in it, and a chain to hold it in place. I want to look at the saddle straps, make sure they're properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked or broken. Should have a rubber gasket underneath to prevent metal-on-metal friction. I want to look at my weed burner exhaust, make sure it's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken, and it's not leaking. A sign of a leaking exhaust would be indicated by a black soot streak. All right, and then I want to look at my quarter panel here and make sure it's properly mounted and secured, and it's not cracked or broken. Now I'll move to the rear drive axle here, and I'm going to start off with my drive axle suspension. This is an air ride suspension. I want to check the front hanger and the shackles properly mounted and secured to the frame. It's not cracked or broken, and it connects to the control arm by the eye bolt. My control arm is properly mounted and secured, and it's not cracked or broken, and it connects in the back to the lower mounting plate of the airbag. My airbag is properly mounted and secured, both top and bottom mounting plates. It has no abrasions, bumps, or cuts, and it is not leaking. My U-bolts are properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked or broken, and they're not loose. I want to look over my shock absorber. I want to make sure that's properly mounted and secured, both top and bottom. It's not cracked or broken, and it is not leaking. And then I'm going to check my brakes. I want to first look at the air line going to my brake chambers, make sure they're properly mounted and secured, not cracked or broken, and not leaking. Then check my ABS line, properly mounted and secured, and it's not cut or frayed. I want to look at my brake chamber. I want to make sure that's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken, and has no holes except for the manufacturer's hole, and is not leaking. My push rod and slack adjuster are properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked or broken, and can have no more than 1 inch of free play with the brakes released. Now these are drum S-cam brakes, and they can have no less than 1/4 inch friction material on the brake pad or shoes. I also want to make sure there's no oil, grease, or debris which could hinder the brakes from functioning properly. I want to look over my drum, make sure that it is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken, and it has no holes or illegal welds. There's also no oil, grease, or debris on the drum that would hinder its operation of the brakes. And there can also be no cracks half the width of the friction surface. Now I want to look at my drive tires. I want to check all 3 sides of the inner and outer tire for abrasions, bumps, and cuts. I should have even tread wear across the top, and it should be the same size and type across the axle. I should have a minimum of 2/32 inch tread depth, and these tires can be a recap or retread. I should have 110 psi of air, and I can check that with a tire pressure gauge at the valve stem or with a tire thumper. I want to check that my valve stem is properly mounted and secured, it's not cracked or broken, and it is not leaking. That valve stem also must have a metal cap. Now since these are dual tires, I want to check and make sure they have the proper spacing of at least 2 inches, and there is no debris between the duals. I also want to check that both my inner and outer sidewall of both tires is properly beaded to the rims. That's going to take me into my rims. I want to make sure that they are not cracked or broken, and there are no illegal welds. I want to check all my lug nuts, making sure they are present and tight. Signs of a loose lug nut would be a rust streak, metal shavings, or white chalky streak on an aluminum rim. I want to make sure that my hub oil seal is properly mounted and secured, it's not cracked or broken, and it is not leaking. This is a closed hub oil seal, so I cannot check the oil level. Then I want to look at my drive axle, make sure that that is properly mounted and secured, and it is not cracked or broken. Now, moving around here to the back of the tractor, I want to look and make sure that my lights are properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked or broken. They're free of moisture. They're the proper color, and they are working. My license plate is secured and not loose, and is current and up to date. I have a spring-loaded mud flap hanger, and it's properly mounted and secured, and it's not cracked or broken. I want to look over my mud flap, make sure that it is not dry rotted, no cuts, dry rots, or damage. It has the proper coverage and the proper clearance. Now I'll need to do an external light check, so I'm going to ask the examiner to please assist me with that, and then that will conclude my Form B inspection. Okay, this is going to be my Form C inspection. That is the entire trailer, including the farthest trailer axle. I'm going to start here in the front of the trailer. I just want to check the overall condition, make sure that there are no holes or intrusions. There's no missing rivets on the front. I want to check my air regulator light, make sure it is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken, and it is free of moisture. Then I'm going to move around here to the side and start at the top and check my marker and clearance light. I want to make sure it's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken, and it is free of moisture and the proper color of amber. Now I just want to look down the side of the trailer. I want to make sure I don't see any holes or intrusions. Look at the rivets. I want to make sure I don't see any missing rivets. And then I want to check the slide rail or the side rail here and make sure there is no damage and it is not cracked or broken. I want to look down the side and check my DOT reflective tape. I must have at least 50% coverage on the side of the trailer. All right, I want to look at my landing gear. I want to make sure that my landing gear is properly mounted and secured and it is not cracked or broken. My landing gear handle is properly mounted and secured and not cracked or broken, and it should have a cradle to stow it in. I also want to check that my landing gear does go up and down. Then I want to look at my landing gear shoes, make sure they're properly mounted and secured, they're not cracked or broken, and they should be free of any debris that could fly off. I want to look at the cross members on the landing gear, make sure that it's properly mounted and secured, and they're not cracked or broken. I want to check the cross members going across the trailer from the front all the way to the back and make sure that none are cracked or broken. And then I want to look at the trailer floor and make sure that there are no holes. Okay. Moving down the trailer here, I'm going to stop right here at this blinker. I want to check my blinker, make sure it is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken. It's free of moisture. It is the proper color of amber and is working. Now I'll move down here further down the trailer and I will start here where the airlines are. I want to check these airlines, make sure they're properly mounted and secured. There's no abrasions, bumps, or cuts, and they are not leaking. The electric line is not cut or frayed. I do want to make sure that these lines have the proper clearance off the ground of 18 inches. Now I want to look at the slide rail on my sliding tandems. Make sure that's mounted and secured, and it is not cracked or broken. It's free of any debris that could hinder its movement from sliding. Since it is a sliding tandem, I want to make sure that the locking pins are out in the lock position. Now I want to look at the release knob, make sure it's properly mounted and secured, it's not cracked or broken, and it is not leaking since it is air controlled. My trailer axle is properly mounted and secured, it is not cracked or broken. Now I want to look over my trailer suspension. This is an air ride suspension. I want to check the front hanger, frame bracket, make sure it is properly mounted and secured to the frame. It's not cracked or broken and connects to the control arm. The control arm is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken and connects in the back to the lower mounting plate of the airbag. I want to look over my airbag, make sure it's properly mounted and secured, top and bottom mounting plates. It has no abrasions, bumps, or cuts, and it is not leaking. A shock absorber, make sure it's properly mounted and secured, top and bottom, and it's not cracked or broken, and it is not leaking. Now I'm going to check my trailer axle brakes. I want to look at the air lines going to the brake chamber, make sure it's properly mounted and secured, not cracked or broken, and not leaking. I want to look at my ABS line, make sure it's properly mounted and secured, and it's not cut or frayed. The brake chamber is properly mounted and secured, it's not cracked or broken, and has no holes except for the manufacturer's hole and is not leaking. Want to look at my push rod and slack adjuster, make sure they're properly mounted and secured, they're not cracked or broken, and can have no more than 1 inch of free play with the brakes released. Now these are drum S-cam brakes, and they can have no less than 1/4 inch friction material on the brake pad or shoes. I also want to make sure there's no oil, grease, or debris which could hinder the brakes from functioning properly. I want to look at my brake drum and make sure it's properly mounted and secured, it's not cracked or broken, and has no holes or illegal welds. There should also be no oil, grease, or debris on the drum that could hinder the operation of the brakes. And there can be no cracks half the width of the friction surface. Okay, I want to check my trailer tires. I want to look at all 3 sides of both tires and make sure there are no abrasions, bumps, or cuts. I should have even tread wear across the top, and they should be the same size and type across the axle. I should have a minimum of 2/32 inch tread depth, and since these are trailer tires, they can be a recap or retread. I should have 110 psi of air, and I cannot check the air pressure in it since it has air regulator lines, but I do want to check those air regulator lines to make sure they're properly mounted and secured, that they have no abrasions, bumps, or cuts, and they're not leaking. Now, since these are dual tires, I want to check that they have the proper spacing of at least 2 inches and that there is no debris in between the dual tires. And then I also want to check and make sure that both my inner and outer sidewall of both tires are properly beaded to the rims. And then that will take me into my rims. And I want to make sure that they're not cracked or broken and there are no illegal welds. I want to look at all my lug nuts and make sure they're present and tight. Sign of a loose lug nut would be a rust streak, metal shavings, or a white chalky streak on an aluminum rim. I want to look at my hub oil seal, make sure it's properly mounted and secured, it's not cracked or broken, and it is not leaking. Now it's a closed hub oil seal, so I cannot check the oil level. However, if it has a sight glass, I can see in through the sight glass. I want to check my trailer axle, make sure that it is not cracked or broken. My mud flap hanger is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken. My mud flap is not cut or dry rotted, and it has the proper coverage and the proper clearance. Okay, I want to look here at my trailer door latch holder, make sure it's properly mounted and secured, and it is not cracked or broken. Then I will look on the back here and check my ABS light, make sure that it's properly mounted and secured, it's not cracked or broken, it's free of moisture, working, and of the proper color. Now at the very back of the trailer, I'm going to start at the top. I have my marker lights. I must have at least 3. Make sure they're properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked or broken. They're free of moisture. They're working and of the proper color. My hinges are properly mounted and secured, and they're not cracked or broken. My door latches are properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked or broken, and secured in the cradle. My door ties are properly mounted and secured and not cracked or broken. Just want to look at the overall condition of the trailer doors and just make sure they're not damaged and there are no holes or intrusions. And then I want to look at the rubber seal that goes around the door and make sure that that's not damaged and it's not dry rotted. Now I want to look at my dock bumpers and make sure they're properly mounted and secured. They're not damaged or dry rotted. My brake light and turn signal is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken. It's free of moisture, is working, and is of the proper color. And then I want to check my DOT bumper, make sure it is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken, and it has the proper clearance. On the back of the trailer, my DOT reflective tape, I must have 100% coverage. My license plate, I want to look at that, make sure it's loose. It's not loose, and it is current and up to date. I want to look at my license plate light, properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked or broken. It is free of moisture. It's working and of the proper color. And I do need to do an external light check, so if the examiner could please assist me with that. And after that, that will conclude everything on my Form C inspection. Now, once you're done with Form C, if by chance you had had the entire vehicle, you would be finishing up with Form C, having done the entire truck. And then you would step onto the passenger side here and you would look down and you would tell the examiner that I will pre-trip this side of my vehicle the exact same way I pre-trip the driver's side of my vehicle. And this would conclude my pre-trip. Okay, so that's everything on the pre-trip. I know it sounds like a lot, but it's real repetitive. So just stick with this form. We're going to learn it in sections, and you're going to do just fine. We have a great record with the pre-trip. All right, so let's get to studying. We're going to do great.